This is the Living Vertizontal podcast, brought to you by The Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal podcast, back with you here this week to continue our journey through the Gospel of Luke together. As a quick reminder, last week we finished the discussion on Luke chapter 13, looking specifically at verses 22 through 35. In that passage, we heard Jesus speak about the narrow door in response to a question from the crowd, and then we heard Jesus' lament over Jerusalem. And throughout our conversation, as we kind of talked about this passage and went back and forth, we discussed feasts in first century Israel and identified Jesus' conversation on the narrow door as a metaphor for the opportunity and expectation of relationship with God to enter the feast of the kingdom of heaven. Too often, the temptation is to allow proximity to Jesus to substitute for personal relationship with Jesus. And we talked about the nearness versus knownness conversation with that. This week, we're going to press on moving into Luke chapter 14. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 14 of chapter 14, where Jesus heads over to a prominent Pharisee's house for a Sabbath meal. While he's there, he heals a man, and he also shares another parable with them. Natasha is going to go ahead and read this passage for us today. So, Natasha, can you read that passage as we move into our conversation?
Yes. Luke chapter 14, verse 1. One Sabbath, Jesus went to eat in the home of a leading Pharisee, and those in attendance were watching him closely. Right there before him was a man with dropsy. So Jesus asked the experts in the law and the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then Jesus took hold of the man, healed him, and sent him on his way. And he asked them, "Which of you whose son or ox falls into a pit on the Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out?" And they were unable to answer these questions. When Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited to a wedding banquet, do not sit in the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited. Then the host, who invited both of you, will come and tell you, "Give this man your seat," and in humiliation, you will have to take the last place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the last place, so that your host will come and tell you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in front of everyone at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then Jesus said to the man who had invited him, "When you host a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or brothers or relatives or rich neighbors. Otherwise, they may invite you in return, and you will be repaid. But when you host a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. Since they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous."
All right. Thank you for reading that for us today, Natasha. As we move into our conversation, I think there maybe is a couple of things that we should point out that we talked about previously. So in the preceding passages or weeks leading up to this conversation, and that is, so 2 weeks ago, we had another passage about the Sabbath. It was a Sabbath day passage. This one actually took place in a synagogue, and Jesus stood up and essentially had a very similar conversation. There was a woman who had been suffering for 18 years that was among them, and he healed her on the Sabbath day. And as a part of this, there was a conversation that ensued, and Jesus was challenging the synagogue leaders and those around them on their perspective and understanding of like Sabbath laws. And so, I mean, back 2 weeks ago, as a part of the midweek meditations, there was a question where we had to kind of look into that, and we identified that there were a number of like Sabbath laws, regulations for the work that could or could not be done on Sabbath. And one of the things that was permitted was for you to untie your animal to take them to get water. But healing was not one of the things that was permitted, because healing in a life or death situation would be allowable because life depended on it. However, if it was something that was more long-term, less
A chronic.
a chronic illness. Thank you. That's a good way to put it. If it was a chronic illness, in other words, this woman who had been suffering for 18 years, chronic illness. That's not something that's going to necessarily kill her today. She's been suffering for so long. Come tomorrow.
She'll be fine.
Yeah. But Jesus calls that out, and it uses the same word for untie. So you're willing to untie your donkey, but you're not willing to untie this daughter of Abraham who has been suffering, right? And so Jesus equates them in a way where he essentially just calls out the ludicrousy of it all. He even uses the word hypocrite, right? He accuses them of being hypocrites because they're willing to help an animal when there's a human who they can literally do the same thing for, and they're unwilling to do that. And so Jesus calls into question their Sabbath rules and regulations. And so here we are now on another Sabbath day, or as verse 1 points out, one Sabbath day, where Jesus is not in a synagogue, but he is going over to the house of a leading Pharisee to participate in a Sabbath meal with them. And so you still have the expectation of Sabbath regulations in place, one. Two, when you think about this idea of like a Sabbath meal at a Pharisee's house, there maybe are some things that we should understand about them. And one of them is typically, this was a leading Pharisee, so this is a prominent figure. This leading Pharisee, prominent figure, is going to have a larger place. And so the area that they have to have this meal in is going to be a rather large area. And while there are going to be specific people who are invited to have a seat at the table, there is space for others to come in as well. And so there's going to be a crowd. And the reason why there's going to be a crowd is because Sabbath meals, especially at Pharisees' houses, were typically like an opportunity to participate in or hear theological conversations, like religious debating taking place. Like this was the main event. This was the entertainment of the afternoon, when they would come together and they would dialogue and ask questions and challenge each other and just kind of go back and forth. And so people would come and they would listen and watch it, because that was kind of just the thing to do. And so as you see this, as we're moving into this conversation, as you envision this in your mind, Jesus is going to this prominent Pharisee's house. Imagine a large table to eat at. Imagine a lot of people around, and there are a lot of people around who are wanting to see, okay, what's going to happen? There's already a crowd of people that are kind of surrounding Jesus with that question kind of hanging in their head, what's going to happen next? But these people, even if know nothing about Jesus, they're showing up to this meal because they recognize that at this meal, there's going to be conversation. What's going to happen? We want to hear the debates. We want to hear the questioning. We want to hear the wisdom in the answers and in the responses. So there's already this expectation of something's going to go down. I want to be there. I don't want to miss it. With that, we move into this conversation. And one of the people among the crowd is this man with dropsy. And I'm going to be honest, I read that word and I say, I have no idea what that is. So Natasha, do you know what dropsy is? Can you drop some wisdom on us on that?
I do now. So, So when we were discussing this at our family Bible study night, we talked about what is dropsy. And so we did some research together.
The girls asked that question.
So, we'll blame it on them. Sure.
Because we
knew what it was. So we did some research, looked it up, and really this is edema. And so it's swelling essentially. So fluid buildup. And normally in a healthy individual, like your circulatory, your lymphatic system, it's going to take care of draining this fluid off of your body. It often would collect in your extremities, but that was just a symptom of a bigger problem, usually some sort of circulatory issue. And over time, this person would continue to swell, and we have medication for this today. Thank you, Jesus, for providing us with medical advancements to help with this. But essentially, the fluid would basically start to make it very difficult to breathe. It would start to make it very difficult to move, painful to stand. It would make it difficult for your heart. Your heart is going to have to work harder as it kind of begins to like be surrounded by this fluid. And so just all of this then is really putting a lot of stress and strain on the body. And ultimately, it will lead to your death. But as you pointed out, Nick, it is a chronic illness. So it's going to be something that does take a long time. Again, this isn't an immediate pressing issue in this exact moment.
Yeah. So very similar to the woman
Very
2
similar.
weeks ago who has been suffering for 18 years. This isn't an immediate concern. It's a chronic illness. I mean, yes, at some point there's going to be a point where it's an immediate concern, but it seems like probably not today. And yet Jesus identifies this man. Jesus sees this man much like he saw the woman.
Yes. Yeah. And you bring up a good point there too. I mean, we talked about how in Luke positions multiple times, both a female and male counterpart story together.
Yeah.
And so wherever there's a feminine component, there's also going to be the masculine component
and vice versa.
And yes, and vice versa. And this is so important because it shows accurately exactly how God views humanity, how he views the kingdom, that the woman is worth healing on the Sabbath just as much as the man is worth healing on the Sabbath, that God came to deliver both the man and the woman. And so this conversation is really, really important, I think, both for them to hear then and for us to hear here today, that there is no difference from God's perspective. All of us are created with different gifts, graces, different natural tendencies. However, God sees us in his kingdom as equally valuable.
Right. Yeah. This is a clear example of the expansiveness and inclusivity of this upside down kingdom of God.
Right.
So this man has swelling of his body, and Jesus turns to the experts. Remember, now he's at this meal, right? And so a part of this meal is like this forum for debate, this forum for conversation, this forum for questions. And so Jesus, seeing the man in front of him, recognizing the need for healing. Again, we talked 2 weeks ago about how just the urgency of the kingdom. And Jesus sees somebody in need, and there's the recognition of the urgency to respond to it. But instead of just immediately responding, he takes stock of the moment and kind of lives into it. Instead of just healing, he's going to ask a question first. He's going to pose that question for conversation as a part of this meal. And that first question is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And now the really unique thing about this, again, this is at the house of a prominent Pharisee, which means there's probably other prominent Pharisees, but maybe not as prominent as this individual, but there's a lot of people present who really should have a good understanding of the law. They should have a really good understanding of how to communicate it. And so a question like this should be really easy for them to answer. And instead of it being an easy answer, we read in verse 4, crickets. But they remained silent. Why do you think they remained silent? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I look at this, I mean, I kind of try to bring it into modern day, and I imagine somebody walking in the room with the capacity to be able to heal an ailment. So like Nick, with your situation, like you've been, you've been sick, and I imagine us sitting around.
It's a chronic illness. It's
right.
Hanging around.
So I imagine us sitting with a bunch of our pastor friends, and, Jesus walks in and he asks this question. And now we know Jesus is capable of healing. We've seen him do this before. And so for us to answer this question and say, no, you can't heal on the Sabbath, well, then I've just made it so he won't heal you, even though I'm really wanting him to heal you. And so I don't know. I don't know if this is part of what was going on through in their minds, but surely there's got to be an element of, goodness, what's the right answer here? Because we want this man to experience healing. We love to see the miracle. Even if we don't care as much about the man's healing, we surely would love to see Jesus do this miracle here and be able to say that we saw it, at the very least, like from a very selfish perspective, you would imagine some of that going on. But then also, man, if I say it's not okay, then maybe Jesus won't heal him. And if Jesus doesn't heal him, then I know his fate and it's not good. And so I don't know what to say. And I feel like that's probably one option of maybe some of what was going on. Did you have other thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, the other side of that exact conversation that you're having is, so you have this personal side where they see him and they want him to be healed, but they
know the law.
They know the law. And that's the other side, is they know the law, and the law says, no, you don't heal on the Sabbath. There are 6 other days, right? That's actually what the synagogue leader said 2 weeks ago in that passage. There are 6 other days. Come on one of those days. And so the Pharisees know that is the response that they are supposed to have. But even in knowing that, like, we have to know that they know that. And even in knowing that, they remain silent. And so it's like there is this tension that exists probably within them, where it's the knowing what the right words to say are in accordance with the law that stands, while also recognizing maybe a little bit of what their heart desires to see on that day, right? I know you're not supposed to heal, but this man really needs it. And maybe you should heal, but I can't say that because I'm actually a leading Pharisee. I'm a prominent Pharisee. And if I say that, yes, you should heal today, now I am actually saying that the religious institution with all of these rules that I have defended and that I am very zealous about, I'm now beginning to pick away at that. I'm now beginning to...
You're undermining its authority.
I'm undermining its authority. And when I do that, I'm maybe even undermining my own authority and my own position. And so you just see this kind of power dynamic that exists without even really much happening. There's one question and then a statement about silence. And I think it's a loaded silence. There is so much tension that is sitting here in the midst of this silence. And at our table on Sunday, we actually talked about how more than likely, in the midst of everything that we just talked back and forth about, more than likely, there is this concern for the public perception or public opinion that these Pharisees had, and that's why they didn't say anything. Because to say something like we just shared either calls into question who they are in their position and everything that they have stood for, or it calls into question their humanity and willingness to actually see the value of a person. And neither of those things is going to bode well in the realm of public perception. Again, there's a lot of people around watching this conversation take place. And could you imagine saying something foolish in front of all of those people? And then all of a sudden, what those people are going to think of you going forward? Either they're going to think you're a completely heartless person, I want nothing to do with them, or they're going to think, wow, they don't even care about the religious institutions that they have so ardently been like trying to defend and protect in front of us and have been getting on us about, and yet they're willing to just buckle on them. Man, they're not even good at their job. Like, shame on them. It seems like public perception may be playing a big role in this. And then from that conversation at our table, we allowed it to ask ourselves the question, like, how often do we allow public perception to influence the words that we're willing to say, to influence the actions we're willing to perform? Because we're worried about what other people might think about us if the truth in the matter really did come out. And now looking back to the story, Jesus doesn't allow that silence to just hang for too long. I mean, maybe he let it hang for a little bit, but that's not the last thing, right? We push on. It's still the same verse. So, but they remained silent, period. Then Jesus took hold of the man, healed him, and sent him on his way. So Jesus wastes very little time putting action to what he's trying to challenge the Pharisees on and what he's trying to communicate and demonstrate to them about the kingdom of heaven. And then he turns to them and asks them, very similar to the question that he asked 2 weeks ago of the synagogue leader. Which of you whose son or ox falls into a pit on the Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out?
Mm-hmm.
And yet again, they were unable to answer these questions. We have silence. And, with this question around our table on Sunday morning, at our table, we didn't actually get very far in this passage. We spent the entirety of our time here in verses 1-6, and there was just so much good stuff that was brought up. And one of those things was in regards to this question that Jesus is asking. And it was one of the teens at our table. He was kind of processing through this question and how, which of you whose son, and he talked about how like Jesus is talking to fathers in the room who, as they're hearing this, they're thinking in their heads, well, of course I'm going to help my son. It doesn't matter if it's Sabbath or one of the other 6 days.
You're not going to leave them there and come back tomorrow?
Right.
We talked about this with the kids and they all giggled at that idea.
I mean,
they said they'd be, for parents out there, they said they'd be pretty upset if you left them in the pit overnight.
Right. So don't do that. But these fathers are hearing this, and they're saying, obviously, like, we're not going to do that. That totally makes sense. And then the teen at our table went further and was like, the really cool thing is, like, Jesus is God the Father, right? Because, we have this Trinity thing. And so you have Jesus, who is God the Father and God the Holy Spirit and God the Son, and he's having this conversation with them and he's talking to them, and, he's talking to them as Father. And this man that he's just healed is his son. And he is unwilling to see him suffer. It doesn't matter what day it is. It doesn't matter that it is Sabbath. And especially even on the Sabbath, seeing his son suffer, the father, being a good father, is not going to permit him to suffer any longer than he absolutely has to.
He's going to pull him out of the pit.
He's going to pull him out of the pit. And so I think just hearing the teen at our table make that connection, I was overwhelmed to recognize, like, Jesus is asking them this question to allow them to see themselves in the story, but he is also putting himself into this story in a very real way. Another thing that we talked about was just how Jesus is putting a face to all of this. It seems like when we think about our conversation from last week, we talked about the importance of knowing and being known by God. Like, this idea of putting a face to everything, making it personal, making it known, being known. Like, Jesus is helping them understand that their rules and their regulations, like, those things begin to crumble and fade away when all of a sudden you have a face to look at, when all of a sudden it's no longer just a theoretical conversation that we're having over a Sabbath meal, but there's actually real people that are being involved, that are impacted by these words that we are saying. Everything changes. And Jesus is like, that's what this kingdom is about. This kingdom is about this personal back and forth, me looking you in the face, you looking me in the face, us seeing each other and caring for each other. That's what this is all about. And we continue to talk about that around our table. And one of the statements that was made was just profound. And I absolutely loved it. It actually helped me make sense of something that Jesus says elsewhere in Scripture. And that is, she made the statement, when you look at the order of creation, man was created first for relationship with God. And then later on in the equation, after that relationship had been broken, the rules entered the scene. And the rules were to help restore relationship with God, even back in the Old Testament. And it seems like the Pharisees had gotten stuck on this rules, and it was almost like they believed that they were created for the rules to then have this relationship. They had gotten it out of order. And again, the question becomes, how often do we get it out of order? Like, the desire of God, our Father, our good God, is relationship. And so in Scripture, Jesus makes the statement that Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. Finally, because of what this individual said at our table, that actually started to make sense because man was created first and then the rules came. Sabbath came into effect again to help us recognize, to create the space to have that relationship with God, to see him at work, to honor him and glorify him, not so we could not do X, Y, and Z. And so it puts a perspective to all of these religious structures from this day, but also I think we should allow it to put a perspective even to the religious structures that exist today.
Yeah, I think that, oftentimes we've talked about this on the podcast before, but our temptation is to prioritize action because those are the things you see. That's what's tangible. And I can prioritize reading my Bible. I can prioritize going to church. I can prioritize doing nice things for people. I can prioritize, I can prioritize buying dinner for random people I see out. I can prioritize giving money to the homeless. I can prioritize, donating clothes to a clothes closet. Like I can prioritize all of these actions. But if I neglect the relationship from which those actions are supposed to flow,
that's exactly right.
Then I've missed the whole point. And I think our temptation sometimes, we can be so well intentioned because we want to see good in the world, but we need to remember the source of the good.
Yeah.
And we need to really embrace that relationship and not lose sight of it.
Yep. 100%.
And I'd like to go back to something that we talked about just a little bit earlier, where we talked about how the people who had come to this meal were very much concerned about the perception of those seated around them, and hence their silence, right? This is why they wouldn't answer Jesus's question.
They didn't want to mess that up.
Right. And so much of what we do absent of relationship is focused on us. It's focused on how do I advance myself? How do I protect or elevate my status? And so I think as we move into this next parable, the parable of the guests, I feel like there's reason why Luke placed this right here, because we've just gotten done talking about our inability to answer based on relationship, this question. And instead we're stuck between, do we obey relationship or do we obey the rules?
Do we protect our status?
Right. Do we protect our status?
And it's like Jesus actually sees through the silence and recognizes this conflict within, this thing that's rooted in their heart that they're struggling with. And he speaks to it. He speaks to it with this parable. And so that's, as we move into this parable now, we see Jesus beginning to, at least beginning at this meal, beginning to address what might actually be going on underneath for the Pharisees to remain silent. We speculated, right, the public opinion conversation, but now Luke has put this here for a reason right next to the story, and it's because there's a relationship. There is a reason why Jesus would now share this parable after the silence. And I do believe it's because he is beginning to address the concern with status that the Pharisees are demonstrating in the first half of our passage.
Yeah. And so Jesus opens up this parable by giving a command. He says, do not sit in the place of honor. And then rather, he goes on to say, go and sit in the last place. And so Jesus is painting this picture of great humility, right? It's counter to this thing that you just mentioned, Nick, about their desire for these positions of prominence, this desires to look good, which, I mean, who doesn't want to look good, right? Sure. Who doesn't want to be in positions of influence where they can affect change, where their life really feels like it should matter, And Jesus is trying to give them a moment to pause and say, in my kingdom, the people that are going to matter most, the lives that are going to matter most, the lives that are going to affect the most change are those that are willing to humble themselves and take a lower position, a lower place. And this isn't necessarily at a banquet dinner, right? After church on Sundays, we always have this shared meal together. On Sunday, it was kind of funny watching the kids get up because usually they all run right to the meal line, right? Yeah. They're first there. Absolutely. They will trample each other to get there. Yeah.
You're liable to get trampled if you get in front of them. Yeah.
Sunday, it was a different story. Sunday, it was like, well, if I take this literally, now I'm going to a banquet. Do I need to be last? Should I? And you saw the kids actually allowing some to go in front of them, or there was a sister who needed to help her brother with some stuff. And so she's like, it's okay. You go ahead and go in front of me, instead of, usually I feel like she would have pulled her brother up to the front of the line. Instead, she took, a later place. And I think, we all of these things are good, right? It's good for us to allow others to, cut us in line from time to time, or to give up a better seat from time to time.
Let them on to Avenue 12 before you have
right.
to get
All
out
of
there.
These things are good. But I think what Jesus is really getting at here is the deeper heart issue of this, right? It's this desire to be above others that he wants to combat. And that he wants to reshape and reform.
It's the innate pursuit of prominence that it seems like is just deep-seated within us.
Yes. And so Jesus is saying, hey, in my kingdom, you want to lower yourself. And Jesus is about ready to, as he goes to the cross, he's going to model this for us. But here he's still teaching, right? He's still teaching this abstract concept that really is countercultural. In our culture, even still today, it is expected that people look out for themselves or their own. And in this instance, Jesus is calling these religious leaders to look out for their neighbor, to look out for the least of these, and to take lower places in whatever life is bringing their way in that moment. It could be in conversation. It could be, in debate. It could be in
this moment at a shared meal with Jesus where there's a man with dropsy. It could look like, instead of staying in silence to protect my position, I respond more with my heart, or I open up to the criticism of maybe where the law is broken, and begin to dialogue with Jesus and hear what he has to say, and accept the correction, accept the challenge, rather than stubbornly stay silent to protect mine and my own. And, as I think about this conversation that Jesus is having about, taking the lowest seat and then allowing the host to elevate you, that's literally what, like, Paul outlines for how Jesus lived in Philippians. It is one of my favorite passages. It's called the Kenosis of Christ. And it just talked about how Jesus, in being very nature God, humbled himself. And as you read that passage, the humbling is this downward trajectory, ultimately humbling himself to death on a cross, not just dying, but dying in the most egregious, humiliating way you can at the time. And so you have this complete downward trajectory, and then the host, the Father, elevates him. There's a turn that takes place right there. And then it talks about how God, the Father, comes in and glorifies Jesus. You see, Jesus's movement in it was a movement of humility. Jesus's invitation to them, to the Pharisees, and to us today is an invitation towards a movement of humility, where we become less and less and less, so that the host can shine through, so that the host can glorify, so that the host can be glorified.
Yeah, I think so often we assume that role of the host, where we decide, I need to make sure I am elevated. I need to make sure I'm heard, or I'm seen, or my values or views are respected, instead of trusting that the host will do that on our behalf. And trusting God really to advocate for us, right? Trusting his way. And this, I want to be careful kind of as we talk about this, because God could ask you, right, in moments to stand up, right, and to be bold. But in other moments, he may ask you to be silent. And it comes back to this relationship piece. I don't want to drive this home too much, but this relationship piece is so important, because if we do not have that connection with God, then we cannot discern the ways he's asking us to be humble. We can't discern our next action. We can't discern the ways he plans to exalt. We can't discern how he wants to bring his kingdom in. We're just kind of operating in no sort of organized manner, and that's just going to bring a mess.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a cohesive action. I think about, watching my young son try to learn how to swim. And the kid wants to swim so badly.
Well, he says he can swim.
Right. We are not there yet,
No,
though.
we are
I
not.
mean, when you put him in, he has all of the motions. He's kicking, he's floundering his arms, trying to do the
thrashing. I would more call it thrashing.
It is an absolute disaster. And because all of the motions are happening, but none of them are happening in any sort of coordinated movement to actually propel him forward to keep him from drowning. And I feel like sometimes this is what we look like in the church. We sit there and we flounder and we're doing all of these different things, all of these good actions, these good motions, but none of it is being coordinated by the Father. And because it's not being coordinated by the Father, he can't then raise it up, right? And we can't have this beautiful picture of the fullness of what the kingdom ought look like.
Yeah. When
God is in control of it, when God is responsible for elevating it and giving it its prominence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's so good. That is a really good corporate call out as we are hearing Jesus's parable to us. I think for me, as you were talking, a personal part that I was hearing in this invitation to humility, again, kind of stepping back from the wedding banquet, but I'm hearing this invitation to allow him to be first, me sit second fiddle, me sit in the lower seat, to allow him to shine through in my life. I, for a long time, wore a bracelet that said, "I am second," as a reminder of that invitation to humility. And a while ago, I took it off because it had gotten stretched out and it was broken. And then less than a week ago, within the last week, I found another new one that was just in the drawer in my desk. And it was Jesus's invitation to me. Hey, remember, in my kingdom, I'm inviting you to be second. I'm inviting you to take the place of least prominence so that my kingdom can shine. And so, as I think about this parable on a personal level for us, yeah, there's probably going to be moments where we find what it looks like to be less than others in different circumstances and situations. But when we're talking about this, the importance of the relationship with God, the humility is an invitation to submit my will, my thoughts, my feelings, and my emotions to Him first and foremost. To turn to Him in everything first, and then flow with the action. To, instead of responding immediately, turn to Him and slow down enough to say, okay, Jesus, how do I respond? That is assuming the position of humility. That is assuming the position of least prominence, where I'm no longer elevating or defending myself or looking out for my own. I am simply listening to Him in expectation that He is there and He sees me. And he's gonna speak. He's gonna lead. And I think, again, kind of more of an abstract thought as we're going back and forth on this conversation, and I reflect on our passage for this week, as well as our passage from 2 weeks ago in the woman. I made the statement made back then, and in making the connection again today, Jesus is seeing them. They are not screaming for attention. They are not trying to accomplish anything and get anything done and demand anything. They're just there, and Jesus sees them. Do we trust Jesus enough to see us without having to be the loudest one in the room, without having to be the one who is the fanciest or doing the most things? In the place of humility, do we trust Jesus to see us? I think that the stories that we've had for the last couple of weeks demonstrate that He's worthy of that trust. But are we willing to do it?
And so then Jesus turns to the host of the event and he says to him, when you host a dinner or a banquet, Do not invite your friends or brothers or relatives or rich neighbors. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. And Jesus goes on and elaborates a little bit about this and explains his why. And as we were talking about this at the kids' table, there's a temptation to think, oh, well, then I shouldn't invite people that I know to come to my birthday party. I should invite people I don't know. And it's not so much that is the focus. Again, remember, we need to hold this through the lens of Jesus is still addressing this enamoring
the pursuit of prominence.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so he's in this moment when he's saying this, you can think of it really today. I feel like the best example we have of it is like networking. You know, when we're at our jobs or our business meetings, oftentimes, or, you know, this could be in our social circles, right? This could be, you know, different, each of us have kind of different, you know, situations, but, you know, imagine your place where, you know, it is where you really have to put your best foot forward so you can really make some good connections. You're showing up at this event really hoping that, you know, whoever you meet with next is going to help you. Maybe, you know, it's you're going to the parent club so that way you can, you know, make connections with some of the other parents there so you can really affect change for the school. Maybe, you know, you're trying to show up to district meetings so that you know, you can make changes there. Maybe, you know, you're going to a meeting with a bunch of corporate business leaders and you're really trying to make some connections there so you can get, you know, your foot in the door.
Your career, right? Move on to a new position.
Exactly. And so this networking thing that we do is probably the closest, I feel like, to what Jesus is trying to address here. And we need to remember that networking in itself is not wrong. But always reaching a hand up and forgetting to continue to reach one down misses the heart of the kingdom. So when I network, I need to remember who I used to be or where I was from or where I'm a part of and do what I can to help others to then also join those same circles, to be a part of those same conversations, to have those same opportunities, right? Instead of focusing so much on my own climb, on my own status, to help others elevate their status and their climb as well, to bring as many people along with you as you possibly can. Again, it's taking that seat of humility. It's lowering myself so that I can elevate others. And I think that when we remember this and when we really embrace this, it's such a beautiful kingdom picture of what God intends to create for us here on earth. It's a little slice of heaven. And I think if all of us could act in this way, it would just be beautiful. As you journey with us through the Gospel of Luke, we recommend purchasing Midweek Meditations, A Journey Through Luke, Part 5, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizontal podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.